Yeah, listen, I know there's some people mad that cassava is going to go to zero, but here's the thing. The list of stocks that I've sent to permanently is very long, and those people don't come around anymore. So I've had a lot of haters over the years. There's nobody here saying, oh man, NVIDIA is going to go to 100. I'm sorry, not NVIDIA, NVIDIA. It's really funny. It's kind of had the same name. NVIDIA. Doesn't that sound like NVIDIA? NVIDIA Biopharmaceuticals, the other NVIDIA. Market cap 100,000. I used to have all the longs for NVIDIA come out and yell at me. I used to hate. Say, Shkreli, you don't know what you're doing. This is the next Amgen. You're going to get burned on your short. Now the stock is 0.1 cents, not even a penny. Bro, it's going on the moon, bro. This thing hasn't traded in like 3 weeks. You gotta make an appointment to trade it. In October, they're planning to have a trade. They might have a trade in October or November. I'll let you know when. You know, you can put your bid in for that. This used to be, look, people used to come to my chat. Like, Martin, you suck. NVIDIA is the best. Those guys are awesome. It's down 97% from when it had like $1 million market cap. 5 years ago, it's down 99.8%. Around here, we were short, if I recall correctly. Maybe it was around here. Yeah, maybe. Oh, yes. This was the period of time we were short. It was a good short. Google can't even calculate how much it's down. It's just, you know what? It's down 100%, all right? Most of the stocks that I've shorted, they don't even exist anymore. So the stockholders of those stocks can't even come here and whine about it because they're like, oh, what about this stock? And people look it up like, that's not even a stock anymore. Like Vital Therapies, there's nothing that you can talk. It's gone. This is an Indian company with the same ticker, but the US ticker is long gone. They merged. I've had so many great biotech shorts. Okay, now this company is called Immunic. And when you reverse merge, the old stockholders get like 1% of the new stock. Even this stock's a joke. So Vital Therapies, these guys merged with Vital Therapies, but Vital Therapies was down 90-something%. You know, and everyone says, oh, it's gonna short squeeze. Oh, you don't understand the science. And then it's like the person's first biotech, and then they stop looking at biotech after that. And I asked them what they think about other biotechs. They're like, I don't know anything about any other biotechs. Then how do you know this is the best one? How do you know this is the best one if you haven't looked at any other biotechs? You fell in love with the first one you saw? They got a name for that. Imagine going to a used car dealership, and the second you walk in the lot, some slick-haired guy, imagine me with the slick-haired, hey buddy, I got a great deal for you. This Chevrolet 1976, brand new condition, only 80,000 miles on it, needs a fixer-upper, but you know, you can have it 25,000. You say, I love that. Great, let's do it. I'm not gonna look at any other cars. I'm not gonna do some research. I'm all in. Moas, diamond hands. You guys are getting me amped up. You're gonna bring back the old Shkreli. I don't like that. I feel the rush. I like the sleepy Shkreli, the quiet Shkreli. You guys missed the old Shkreli, the crazy Shkreli. Yeah, 𝗥𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏 went bankrupt. I was a little too ham on that one. But I pay for it. I mean, if I'm somehow suggesting I made money on every trade I've ever made, that is not true. I've not made money on every trade. I don't need security when I go out in public, no. People like me, believe it or not. Like the people watching right now. People like me because you're gonna like me when I save you money for not owning cassava. That's when you're gonna love me. You're gonna hate me when you don't sell it and I say, I told you so. Because nobody ever listens to reason, they listen to their ego. Check your ego at the door, ask yourself, do I really know the biopharmaceutical industry? Is this really what I understand in life? No, it is not. If you're in cassava, you gotta ask a guy like this. This man discovered half of Alzheimer's logic. They discovered in 1992 𝗕𝗏𝗍 is formed in normal cells from its precursor. This man found tau, this man found 𝗕𝗏𝗍. Come on, bro. Deserves a Nobel Prize. You out here talking about some CUNY guy. No offense, I'm a CUNY grad.
I'm good.
Thanks for calling.
How you doing?
looking at 𝗕𝗏𝗧𝗏. You guys watching? Matt's is a well-known tech entrepreneur who's, I believe, the company's largest shareholder, or at least one of them. He knows the company.
Largest individual shareholder.
Got it. Largest individual shareholder, knows the stock really well. Of course, believes in the company. And, just for everybody watching, when somebody's long on a stock and I'm shorted or vice versa, it's never personal. I've been in this situation with friends. A friend of mine was long 𝗕𝗏𝗢𝗏𝗏. To say it was shorted would be the understatement of the century. And they were long it, and he says, I still think it has a chance. And I said, okay, think what you want. It turns out in that situation I was right. I've been wrong many times, but I didn't lose my friendship with the guy just over a stock. And I think the people that are really excited about this stock, it's fine to be excited about a stock, but it really is, for a professional investor, there's nothing personal about this. It's just, I'm looking for stocks to buy, I'm looking for stocks to short, so are you. That's it. Just looking for the truth, nothing more, nothing less. And by the way, my father just passed away. I've never been hit harder in my life, and I'm somebody who went to prison for 5 years. That was nothing compared to losing my father. And he was the main viewer of my live streams. I did them mostly for him. I know what it's like to see illness in the world, and I know the promise of biopharma. I love this industry. But, at the end of the day, I think compartmentalizing a little bit about, is this going to help? My dad died of cardiovascular disease. And maybe I should be, but I'm not particularly focused on cardiovascular companies. I don't think about what could have been, could my dad have taken blood thinners or antihypertensives or lipid lowering drugs and he'd still be with us. I don't fault anybody who thinks that way or wants to support a disease. They should do that. But to me, all the people I know who've had Alzheimer's or don't have Alzheimer's, I do care about them. I do want them to succeed. This isn't some weird, vindictive, sociopathic behavior. To me, it's a stock. I can't change the results of the trial. Nobody can. You can sit and pray and hope, or you can sit and pray and hate, but we cannot affect with our minds or our words how a molecule will work or not work in a human body. So to me, that makes it sort of okay to short a stock like this. If we could affect it, I wouldn't want to be shorted. I'd want the drug to work. But we can't change the future. I think it's deterministic. I'm actually writing a paper about 𝗕𝗏𝗧𝗏. I think that part of the paper is this idea that clinical trials are deterministic. And I think it's one of the faults that a lot of people have when they're first looking at clinical trials. And by the way, I'm not going to patronize you here and say that, I know more than you and, so forth and so forth. I'm just going to sort of stick to the facts and leave ad hominems at the door and leave kind of calls to authority at the door. But oftentimes when I see people looking at trials for the first time, which I think is the case for some 𝗕𝗏𝗧𝗏 investors, not necessarily Matt, but some, I think that there's this idea that chance plays a big role in clinical trials. And I don't think that's true. I think that clinical trials are almost like mechanistic entities that could be studied and predicted. Now, there's still probability, but the actual likelihood of a trial repeating itself is deterministic. So I think the meatiest thing we can discuss here, you mentioned the clinical trials, so let's talk about that. I think that's big time, like the most important thing. And I also think it's where a lot of misunderstanding is. So there was a phase 2 study, to be unambiguous, this is NCT 043-88254. You're a very large stockholder. I've filed 13 Gs and Ds on many companies myself. I know the amount of work it goes into to be a large stockholder, and you've got a very big bet here. So I'm not sure I've had a personal bet that big, by the way, in my career.
Okay.
For my own money. Probably pretty close, but it's a very big bet. So I respect it. So I'm looking at the NCT entry. They said about 200 people would join the study, open label BID for a year, but at 12 months you randomize 1-to-1, sort of a withdrawal study for 6 months. That is the only data, clinical data, that is worth looking at. Open label data that's not compared to a control group is meaningless.
It'd be meaningless in certain diseases, but with Alzheimer's disease, there is a pretty big correlation between starting MMSE scores in a clinical trial and what a placebo would typically perform at. And it's because the disease is, especially at 1 year, is not erratic, it's downward sloping. In cancer, when a tumor shrinks, you don't need a placebo if a tumor doesn't just shrink caused by an immune system that doesn't have any treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've seen this movie in a number of different settings. Like one I was very personally involved with was Larson with Sarepta, at the time called 𝗕𝗵𝗍𝗍. In that case, it was even sort of more stark. You have Duchenne muscular dystrophy patients who are on a very steep downward slope. They don't get better. And there's no way they're doing anything but declining every year. My experience in clinical trials is that tends to not be true necessarily. The same dynamic played out with that one I mentioned, 𝗕𝗏𝗢𝗏, where in that case it was a cancer drug, there was this expectation that there was a certain survival for these patients, and that if patients were living longer on a blinded basis, then therefore this drug must be doing something extraordinary because that blinded group is living so long that it can't be possible that some of these patients aren't doing really, really well. And the reality is the drug did not separate from placebo at all. And it just happened to be these patients were a little healthier, and standard of care has changed a little bit. And you can't really expect any given population, especially a small one, to behave any way that you prognosticate. And the real true litmus test, and this is why we control clinical trials, comes in the clinical trial. It comes in a double-blind, randomized, ideally placebo-controlled, multi-center, study. And even then, you cannot necessarily rely on results. For example, there was a very famous trade on Wall Street that I was involved in. A lot of guys in the professional healthcare investing community know this all too well. This was a company called Medivation, and the drug was called Dimebon. And Dimebon had an incredible result. It was published in Lancet, one of the best medical journals ever. ADAS-Cog change of 4 points, p-value many, many zeros before the 1, and did not replicate in phase 3. And it was not a surprise to a lot of people who did deep, deep digging that this didn't replicate, but it was a surprise to some who said, look, the phase 2 was so good. It was about 200 patients, by the way. And this wasn't randomized discontinued. This was like a priori, straight up, head-to-head, and just a home run result. Like you couldn't have asked for a better result, and it didn't replicate in phase 3. Well, part of that is, one, what is the mechanism? Why should the drug work? And then two, why should the clinical trial results be relied upon? And these are two fundamental questions that I think we give short shrift to sometimes when we look at these companies. Now, in mechanism, it's funny. Some people say, Martin, aren't there drugs that people just don't even know how they work? The truth is not really. There have been a few. The best example I can think of for a drug that was just serendipity is thalidomide. So thalidomide was designed to be a somnolence inducer to help people with morning sickness. And it ended up causing birth defects and kind of heralded the difference between the American regulatory infrastructure and the European infrastructure. It was never approved in America. The FDA declined it. And it kind of gave a lot of power to the FDA and a lot of clout. And so thalidomide, decades later, was adopted by Celgene, which became one of the most successful biopharmas ever. And there was a famous short seller who went from Morgan Stanley to Soros, and as far as I know, is maybe not even in the industry anymore. And the short seller was puzzled. How could this drug work? There's no way it could work. The mechanism doesn't make any sense. And what's funny is that they were right. Thalidomide was designed in the 60s. There was barely any molecular biology then. There was no idea how to design a drug really exquisitely to treat this complex disease, multiple myeloma. It turns out that thalidomide accidentally, completely serendipitously binds, it does a two-way binding where it binds one molecule, the target molecule, and then it binds a ubiquitin ligase where it then shepherds the protein to be degraded. And now we call these PROTACs. And we've actually used thalidomide and created analogs to make PROTACs to other targets. And it's like this miracle, like medicinal chemistry will never be the same because PROTACs now exist. And it just happened to be some random guy in the 60s stumbled upon PROTAC. And maybe that could be what's happening with cassava. It's possible. The reality, though, is almost all medicine today is rationally designed. Accidents happen, serendipity happens, but...
Yeah, the technology is much better, and the experiments that can be run can show much more in the clinic.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the background of
in the lab.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And so what I did is, like, starting from first principles, I spent a ton of time looking at every paper. And you may know how to pronounce this better. Wang can be pronounced Wang or Wang. I assume it's Dr. Wang. Well, no disrespect.
Dr. Wang has never corrected me. I don't know if I've directly called him.
No insult
Maybe Wang.
to Dr. Wang if I'm saying it wrong. The school he went to is no longer in existence. It's sort of morphed, which is not uncommon, by the way, kind of morphed into Drexel. It was a medical college in Pennsylvania. They kind of ran out of money. It sort of moved around a bit. But the guy that he did a lot of his work with was rather interesting. The guy did a lot of great research. I was wondering what would I find? Would I find a guy that meandered around the bush here, didn't really do neuroscience? No, he's actually a very serious neuroscience researcher. I can't comment necessarily on the quality of the work. I know the space okay, but it looked like work you would do in that era of pharma. It looked very typical. He did some work with GSK, some other pharmas, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that stuck out to me. Moving from medical college to CUNY was a little bit interesting. Obviously, the whole CUNY debacle now is what it is. There is a guy that he spent almost his whole career with, which was really interesting. And I'm going to pull his name up. It's hard for me to know, but I think he was his thesis advisor, but he also joined him as kind of a lab member. So it's really hard to sort of figure out what is what. But the fellow's name, Elton Friedman. And I have a little discrepancy with Dr. Friedman where he got his PhD, because there's two different, he actually on CUNY's website, he lists two different
How do you spell Friedman?
F-R-I-E-D. So his first paper was published 1980.
Must have been some older ones.
Oh yeah. I go back to the beginning. I don't want to miss a thing. In short selling, if you miss a single thing, he could crucify you. So I've learned over the years to just make sure I got every single thing. And these papers had nothing to do with Alzheimer's, they're neuroscience papers. They're important proteins. It's good work. Like, they study lithium. So 86 was his first paper. And I don't know if he had received a PhD by then. I do have the date, of course. He did all his work on basic neuroscience stuff, like nothing out of the ordinary. There's even a paper in 91 where the title is Protein Kinase Activity Changes in the Aging Brain. So, like, this guy was around the neuroscience hoop a long time. Assuming that when you are publishing and around that hoop, you learn all of the basic biochemical kind of assays and tools and devices and equipment and et cetera. So nothing stuck out to me. All the journals were like good journals, nothing too great. And one of the other maybe small criticism I would have is that almost everything he did was published with Elton, which I found to be like a little weird that he was basically like attached at the hip to this guy. Usually you publish with a guy for a couple of years, you might publish without him. Like, I don't know too many people where you're publishing with the same guy every single publication. I can't find too many publications where Elton isn't on the paper until around like 2002. He starts to publish, in fact, first paper 2006 with Lindsey Burns, and Elton kind of fades into the background. Again, I kind of want to unravel the Elton mystery, but that's just one thing that came up in a little bit of my work. So the big question really, at the end of the day, other than doing this exhaustive investigative reporter almost due diligence.
The one paper that's important, and I don't see Friedman on it, this is where I started really looking at his research, was 1999. The beta amyloid binds to the alpha-7 nicotine acetylcholine receptor. that he did with Johnson Pharmaceuticals.
So I know the nicotinic space. I actually sold the first ever nicotinic antagonist called mecamylamine. I personally am not convinced that the acetylcholine. Now remember that the Aricept is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. It was the first ever Alzheimer's drug. So, you know, what I'm about to say may be a little surprising, but I personally don't think alpha-7 is that important in Alzheimer's. But I think that, like, the general important thing for anybody watching is basically this bigger question is this guy a fraud or not? You know, and that's something that is kind of the bigger question, the meta question here. And a lot of his papers have been retracted. There's been this pile on, basically. And I know what it's like to be piled on unfairly or fairly. You know, but there tends to be a self-reinforcing phenomenon that happens where you just have this, oh, I heard that guy's a bad guy. Oh, I heard that guy faked Western blot. Oh my God, stay away from this guy. We got to fire this guy, et cetera, et cetera. That sort of tends to happen. What the truth is kind of something that basically only he knows in some ways. And for better or worse, I'm actually rather disgusted that the DOJ is going to try to find that truth as well, which I think it's kind of reprehensible to indict a, I mean, is he elderly? Is that the right phrase? A 60-something?
60s, he's not young.
Yeah, 60-something-year-old scientist that could be facing jail time. It's really unbecoming in my opinion, but I don't control the DOJ, so.
What I think is strange about what the DOJ is doing is how, you know, they're accusing him of causing cassava to submit, basically they're saying fraudulent NIH applications for grants by manipulating research, essentially, falsifying information that he gave to them. The NIH and ORI actually have a process for dealing with this. It's ORI is the institution that is the Office of Research Integrity that has a budget from the federal government, that has a process that they use for investigating accusations of research misconduct. And that's what's odd to me is, yeah, the citizens petition was submitted. The DOJ, or I guess the FBI, went into his house. Yeah, literally 2 weeks after that.
That's what they do.
and I'm like, okay, how? Well, if it's ultimately was research integrity that was the problem, there's a whole process at ORI that involves CUNY, where they have the institution that the person worked at, that did the research under, does an internal investigation. That investigation, we all know, totally just blew up because the guy doing it leaked the investigative report before ORI actually got it, accepted it, and made a ruling. Normally, they would submit that report from CUNY to ORI. A panel of people at ORI will determine whether or not they feel research misconduct happened. They would rule that and tell Dr. Wang and his attorney, we believe you did or did not commit research misconduct. As a result, we're going to bar you from doing future grants,
sure,
et cetera.
I agree with you. That should have been the process.
And at the end of that, they're supposed to refer it to the FBI.
Well, what I've learned from those goons is that there's a sort of corporate connection between the DOJ and law firms. It is not hard to get somebody indicted. And I have a friend who worked at Google, really senior executive, left, really kind of one of the pioneers in autonomous vehicles, left to go to Uber, pissed Google off, obviously. They invested a lot with this guy, made him very rich, and he's going to the competition. They picked up the phone, they called a law firm, and they had this guy indicted, lickety-split. I mean, it did not take long to get this guy indicted. Goldman did it with a Russian quant researcher. You can find, you know, in the Goldman case, the guy emailed himself some source code to work at home, and they said, well, that's trade secret theft, that's this, that's that, you're getting indicted, you're going to do 7 years. And the guy actually did 7 years. And so the point I'm making is that even in my own case, the law firms, the big law firms of the world, whether it's Cooley or, pick your company, Ropes and Gray or Skadden or whatever, all of these guys who, you and I both paid millions of dollars to for various things. Imagine you've paid, I don't want to pick on any specific firm, but imagine you've paid one of these big law firms $5 million to take your company public or to do a merger or whatever. That's high margin business. They owe you favors. They want more business from you. If you're Google, you're a really good client. Now, where did almost every big law guy work at some point? At some point, they were a government prosecutor. That is the training grounds. So it is not hard.
That's where Jordan Thomas, he's the one that represented the whistleblowers.
Right.
It's whistleblower in air quotes, but he worked at the SEC and DOJ.
Not hard for him to pick up the phone and say, hello, my old friend John, or whoever it is at DOJ, you're an AUSA. Don't you know that I have the perfect indictment for you? Oh, tell me all about it. Do you want to go golfing next week? How's Cindy, your wife? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's not the relationship you want to be on the other side of. And that's basically the relationship I was on the other side of. And many other people find themselves at fault here. Now, the flip side of this is the simple response is don't commit a crime. And I do think that there's some truth to that. At the same time, if you're trying to prove your innocence against the DOJ, good luck. It's about 99.9% conviction rate. You're not going to do it. Although I will say the one thing, Matt, that struck me as interesting is that the jurisdiction here, I think, was Maryland. Yeah, kind of an odd place to indict somebody. I think the judge is probably fine. They're typically randomly assigned. It's the AUSA that brings the case. And of course, NIH is in Maryland, right? So it kind of makes sense from that perspective. But typically the stuff, the AUSA has the ultimate call to make. Do I bring the weight of the federal government down on this individual, knowing full well that it almost certainly will lead to profound problems for that individual? And to do it to a research scientist, look, in hedge funds, it's occupational hazard. Half of us have gone to jail.
A lot of money moving around.
Yeah, it's just is what it is. In science, look,
it's very rare. There's only been 3 that I found.
It's to me, it's disgusting. It's ridiculous. They did this to a Harvard chemistry professor because of espionage, kind of taking money from the Chinese kind of thing. And I thought that was absurd. And the one thing I'll tell you about science that I know, having conducted thousands of experiments and paid for hundreds of millions of dollars of research, is science is not perfect. We hold up science on a pedestal. It's our best process to discover the truth. But if I'm going to tell you that I have the backup data for every mouse experiment I ever did, or every lab experiment I ever did, absolutely not. Now, have I ever doctored a Western blot? No, I haven't doctored anything. But the idea that, we have all the supporting evidence, we've got every, bit of, backup for every single thing we've ever done, that's just nonsense. That doesn't happen in science.
No. Most real scientists, when they talk about it's the case, especially ones that have done as much volume as he did.
Yeah, you just don't typically see that.